the Twitterverse is a crazy place as it is. I mean, that's not even the news. That's almost like every single synapse fired in every single person's brain, depending on who you follow and the hashtags you follow. I've looked at this market hard for about 6 months, and I always tell my students, news, in my opinion, usually has one of two agendas: to get you to get emotional and sometimes to transact. Now, I'm not saying there's a big conspiracy out there, but I'm just saying those are the two things that we probably see. And now with the mobile apps and everything, it's unlike anything I ever saw back in my day. And both of those impulses are usually wrong when it comes to trading. How do you teach new people to even process news? I mean, you just talked about going blank on an asset for 24 hours. Is there a way that you can go on, I think what Tim Ferriss called a low media diet back in his 4-hour work week days, right? Where he wouldn't consume media. How do you tell people to do it?
Yeah, I don't think that the news cycle has much effect on cryptocurrency, certainly, and on Bitcoin. In fact, I think that the news follows the price as opposed to preceding it. And it's something that we see every single time Bitcoin drops. And this is not unique to Bitcoin. This happens with the stock market as well. The minute it goes down, you start to get all the bad news and all the reasons it's going to zero and all the reasons that this is the generational top that we've all been calling for the last 30 years. We're finally right. So let's take Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin tops. Somebody sees an opportunity to rinse a whole lot of leverage out of the system. Forget the news. The reason Bitcoin dropped from 65,000 to 50,000 is because $10 billion were liquidated and 10,000 and a million individual traders had their accounts liquidated. That's an opportunity that someone with a lot of money is going to take every time. Okay. So let's just say that the first beginning of that move was purely technical. It was traders. Same reason we saw gold dump a couple of weeks ago, by the way, because it lost a support level, stop losses triggered, there was a cascade and it went down. That's gold. So it's much easier on an asset like Bitcoin. So we have a cascade of liquidations. Price drops to 50. Price precedes the news. Then the bad news starts. Tesla's not going to accept Bitcoin for cars anymore. There might have been 10 people on the planet that would have ever traded their deflationary asset, hard money Bitcoin for a car that's worth 30% less the minute you drive it off the lot. But let's take that aside, right? So nobody's buying a Tesla with Bitcoin. It was the idea that maybe they could. That sparks the energy debate, which we've had for 10 years and happens every single time Bitcoin drops. That leads into China. China banning Bitcoin has happened 17 times and there's still Bitcoin in China. That leads to India. That leads to Bitcoin's only for criminals and hackers and ransomware. And that's where we're at now. And that is the same negative news cycle that happens after Bitcoin price drops every time, which instills, as you said, fear in people and causes weak hands to exit their positions at the bottom. And if you look at on-chain metrics or anything fundamental about Bitcoin, while all of that was happening, the biggest wallets were buying the entire time in the 30,000 as retail continued to one more story. I'm going to hold my Bitcoin. I'm going to hold it. Oh, one more negative story, finally give in and sell, and then price eventually rockets. It's the same with every market. It's the same every time. And it also happens with the good news, by the way, right? Just like you said, the Uber driver, the barber, the Bitcoin's going to $10 million when it's only at 20,000. Those are the signs that you're starting to get the positive news cycle to the upside.
Now, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong, but does this happen 10 times more in crypto than it does in equities or any other, market we've seen probably in history? It's magnified in this space, right?
It seems like it, but I can tell you, and I'm not old in this market at all, right? I mean, given this market's only existed for 12 years, but I got in 2016. There are people I interview 14, 13, 11, 10, have really been here since the Bitcoin pizza days. Yeah. And back then it was the same general narrative, but it wasn't the media, right? It was the community. The media didn't talk about it. The media didn't talk about Bitcoin. So when I got in 2017, if Bitcoin was mentioned in Forbes, price went up 15%, right? Because there was no news cycle for Bitcoin. And this is the first time, I think 2017, when retail really started to pile in and you had that first sort of bubble, that was the first time it became part of the news cycle. But 2020, late 20, early 21 was the first time that you saw it as a part of the ticker on CNBC, right next to every asset, as a part of every single 30-minute financial news program. So I think it's also a function of just the assets maturing, mainstream adoption, or at least awareness, is happening. And therefore they're talking about it more, which then amplifies every single story because people don't understand the assets. So one network runs a negative story, 10 more networks run to pick up that story and give their own opinion as news on that story. We know how the mainstream news cycle works, obviously. So I do think right now that crypto takes a beating on the downside because everyone's talking about it. It's kind of a good thing when you think about it in that regard.
Yeah, it's better than the old days when nobody would talk about it. Back in 2013 and 14, when everyone, like you said, wanted people to talk about it. This definitely seems magnified. Even things I've seen over the years, even like compared to .coms. Maybe it's because it's got this peer-to-peer network. Maybe it's new investors. Maybe it's a super mobile oriented. Maybe it's a digital thing. And also this news is digital and it's come of age in the age of Twitter and mobile Twitter and Instagram. I don't know. Something feels magnified. It also seems to be a really convenient, whipping boy and great fear device. I mean, if you're a news media outlet, I mean, if you go into crypto news or you go into US Treasury news, I mean, maybe it's more of a no-brainer now. And I could be wrong. But we'll see if that continues.
I think it's a function of the manner in which we consume news now, which you said, very eloquently. I mean, Bitcoin was born in a digital age. It's a digital asset. And now we live in a world where opinion is news. News is 24/7. Listen, I'm 44 years old. When I grew up, you either watch Peter Jennings or Dan Rather once a day, and that's how you consumed your news. And that was it. There was no 20, CNN maybe started in the early 80s when I was a kid, but there was no 20, people didn't watch the news 24/7. There was no social media. They weren't consuming this stuff. You watched your 30 minutes of news. You got the key stories, generally with actual facts being presented, God forbid, and you went about your life. But now we live in a world where everybody's talking about everything all the time, and every single person views themselves as a justified media personality. Every person with a Twitter account, they've got their voice, and whoever's listening to them, they're their own network, even if it's only 17 people listening. And that's the way that people sort of approach the world now. So yes, I think it's just all amplified by the very nature of the media, and because it's an asset that the big players probably are starting to take notice of and potentially fear. I don't believe, I'm not so hyperbolic that I believe that they want to kill Bitcoin because they think it's going to replace the dollar and all those sort of maximalist opinions. But, it's the old saying, first they ignore you, then they fight you, then they join you, whatever. I think we're at the then they fight you phase. After thinking they could ignore it and it would just go away, now it's not. So we're seeing the news kick in.